Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Anam Lodi and I am the media and research coordinator at Renewables First. So Afaf Ali will be moderating to this session, and we have a very dignified panelist list today who will be sharing their views with us. I'll just set up some house rules before I hand it over to Afaf. Um, So because today's session is in Chinese and English, we have the interpretation option. You can select which language you want to hear the webinar in. You can select English or Chinese. You can ask questions from the panelists. So we have the Q&As option in the bar below. So you can select and send us your questions, and you can address them to specific panelists, and we'll ask them at the end of the event the questions you have shared. Also, please make sure that you have muted your mic when the panelist is talking, or there is no interruption and there is no background voice. I'll hand it over to Afaf now, who will be uh, starting this formally. Thank you. And if you have any issues, you can message me privately also. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, it's Safaf Ali and I'll be moderating this session. Currently, I'm a research analyst at Renewables First. So formally starting this webinar, which is Pakistan's Green Energy Pathways, Inspirations from China. I firstly introduce Renewables First. It's a Pakistan-based think tank for energy and environment. It is striving hard for just and inclusive energy transition in Pakistan by forging multiple collaborations between the market and the stakeholders and the government regulations. So this webinar will cover how China has become a global leader in renewable energy with 29% of the world's total installed capacity, while providing electricity to the whole population by 2016 as well. Even by 2019, $758 billion were invested as a cumulative capacity, which is higher than the United States, Germany, and Japan. So uh, the country's success in RE development is attributed to its innovative policies and infrastructure, such as its 5-year plans, the RE Development Fund, and the effective management of curtailed renewable energy generation. So, the focus of this webinar is to discuss China's journey towards accelerating investments in RE sector in Pakistan and providing key lessons on which we can develop robust renewable energy supply chain and procedures in Pakistan and its journey towards a sustainable future. This platform is an excellent opportunity to learn from the industrial experts and engage with the like-minded individuals. So I welcome you all to gain a lot of insights in renewable energy sector from this webinar. So for today's sessions, we have speakers with diverse experience in RE sector, and either it's policy, finance, infrastructure, or development plans. There will be two presentations. First will be by Mr. Wei Chen, and the second will be Mr. Hyan. And then it will be followed by two other speakers who will provide highlight on Pakistan's inclusivity and the learnings from China and how can we incorporate all those policies or the development plans in Pakistan. So moving forward towards our first presentation by Mr. Weichin, I would like to introduce him. He is Deputy Secretary General of Chinese Renewable Energy Industries Association. Mr. Wang has mainly worked in the power market and policy, renewable energy technology transfer, the planning of China's carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. He has led the World Bank's report 40 years experience in renewable energy development in China, providing a comprehensive overview on the RE development. So, Mr. Wei Chen, would you like to share your screen?
好的，谢谢主持人，我现在共享一下我的屏幕。
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
你们能看到吗
Can
Is
you
it
see my
visible to
screen?
all of us?
？OK，谢谢主办方的邀请，谢谢
Thank
主
you
持
for the
人。
organizer,
很
for
高
the
兴今天有
organizers.
机会给
I
大
want
家
to
一起分享一些中
say
国的
that
可
I'm
再
really
生能源这
happy
个
to
发
share
展
with
经验。
you our experience in developing renewable energy.
主要分为以下
Here
六
is my
个
content.
部分。
I will
首先是中国的可再生能
unfold
源发展
my
历程和成就，
speech
然后
in
是
the
政策
following
法规体
aspects.
系，
Firstly,
还有一
that
些
is the
典型
stages
行业
and
的经验，
achievements of China
然后呢
renewable
是一些
energy
最佳的实
development,
践案例，
followed by
最后是经验
policies
总结和这
and
个未来的
experience,
趋
best
势和挑战。
practices, experience conclusion, and future challenges.
那中国的可再生能源呢，其实可以分为3个部分。那第
There
一
are
个阶
three
段呢是
parts for
2005年
China's
以前，
renewable
第2个阶
energy
段呢是快速
development.
发
The
展阶
first
段，
is
大概
before
是在2016年到
2005. The
2017年。
second
那
phase
第3
is
个阶段呢
between
是高比例发
2006
展阶段，也
and
就是2018年到
2017,
现
and the
在。
third phase is from 2018
那
to
在
now, which is a
2005
high
年以前
proportion
呢，
stage.
中国的可再生能源处
Before
于一个起步阶段，
2005,
主要是通过
China
技术引
is
进，
in
实现
infancy
实现了这
stage.
个
By
部分的
introducing
产业
advanced
化。
technologies, China
那
realized
2016年
industrialization
2006
of
年到
wind
2017
power
年，
and
随着技
PV
术的进步呢，
industry.
可
During
再生能源进
2006
入
to
快速发展阶段，成
2017,
为
as
重要
technology
的替代
advanced,
能源。
efficiency
那从
raised, now
2018年到
renewable
现在，
energy
可
has
再生能源
entered
发展出
into
现
a
了
large-scale
这
development
个
stage, and from
项目飞
2018
跃，
to now, there is a
进入了高比例发展的阶段。
quantitative leapfrog, and China is now in a very high-speed development
那我们都知
stage.
道，从全球范围来看，可
As
再
we
生能
all
源发
know,
展离不开政策的支持。
renewable
那在中国也
energy
同样是这样。
development
那从
depends largely
可再
on
生能源
policies.
开始发展以来到现
That
在，
is the
中国
same for
制定了
China.
大量的
So
政
there
策
are a
法规
lot
来
of
支持可再生
policies
能源
and
的发展， 主
incentives
要包括
made
可
to
再生能源法、
stimulate the development
可再
of
生能源发
renewable
展规划、
energies. Some
标准、
laws are
经
like
济激
renewable
励
energy
政策
law,
和
development
其他
plans
相
for
关政策。
renewable energy, and also there are a lot of economic
可再生能源
incentives
法
and
是
relative policies. The
中国可再生
renewable
能源发
energy
展的基
law
石，它规定
is
了
a
跟可再生能源
fundamental
发展的多项制度，
thing
这
for
些制度
China's
在可再生
development
能源
of
发展方
renewable
面
energy.
起到了重要的作用。
It
比如
plays
说
a great role.
分
For
类
example,
分类电价制度，也就是 feed-in tariff 制度。
it formulated the national feed-in tariff system
其次是可再生能源
to
发展规
help
划，就包
the
括
industry.
可再生能源中长期发
And
展规
also
划，
here,
以
let's
及
see the
11.5、
development plans for renewable
12.5、
energies.
13.5、14.5
China
可再生
has
能源发展规
its
划，这些规
11,
划给
12,
市场
and
释放了
13 five-year
信号，
plan, which
也
release
提升了市场
good
参与者的信心啊，
signs
就
to
是
the
让大家
market
更有
and
信心
encourage the
来发
market
展可再生能
players
源。
to develop renewable energy.
那除了法律和
Apart from laws
规
and
划以外，
regulations,
中国从
China
2000年到现在制定了很多可再生能源
has
的标
also
准
made
啊。那
some
初步
standards.
统计呢，超过有600多项的标准，就包括国家标准、能源标准、电力标准等等。这些标准为可再生能源的健康可持续发展铺平了道路。另外一方面就是经济激励政策。那可再生能源法对税收、金融等经济激励政策都做出了原则性的要求啊，主要包括固定上网电价的政策、增值税优惠政策、所得税优惠政策、土地使用税减免政策，还有贷款优惠政策等等。这些经济激励政策在一定程度上降低了可再生能源的成本，增加了投资吸引力。除了直接相关的政策，还有一些间接促进可再生能源的相关的政策，就包括应对气候变化的相关的政策，还有大气污染防治和控制的政策，以及北方地区清洁取暖的政策，还有绿色工业制造等等。这些政策虽然没有直接规定可再生能源的相关的这种支持，但是它为可再生能源的发展创造了良好的市场环境，促进了可再生能源的消费，通过消费拉动了可再生能源的
Relates the
增长。
consumption of renewable energy, and these efforts would promote the development of renewable energy.
And next, let's see the industry experience
会介绍
development and solar power development. Mr. Qin Haiyan will introduce wind power, and I will focus on solar power. China's PV industry developed in 3 stages. The first one is before year 2001. That is a very early stage for solar power. The government have issued several measures, including attracting investment and encouraging the development of PV industry, and also using international commerce to level up the quality of PV industry. And the government also offers financial support, encourage the companies to go public, and then formulate a more comprehensive industrial chain. The second stage is from 2011 to 2017. That is a growth stage for solar power industry. The government also takes several measures to help the industry develop. The government have several projects, including PV pacemaker project, PV projects to alleviate poverty, standard improvement, technology research, and feed-in tariff policy implementation. The third stage is from year 2018 to now. So that is the age of grid parity. That means there will be no subsidy for solar power. So the cost for solar power electricity equals that to coal-fired power plant. The government continues to support technology R&D.
加强电网的调峰能力，以促进风电和光。
And the government also encourages the implementation of grid parity. And next, I will show you some of the best practices of renewable energy development in China, both from the perspective of local governments and also renewable companies. Well, I have selected one city in China. The name of the city is Dunhuang in Gansu province. In year 2016, Dunhuang was selected as a demonstration city of high proportion new energy utilization. And it planned to achieve 100% new energy consumption and clean energy electricity provision. Dunhuang takes several measures to promote the development of renewables. For example, Dunhuang focuses on the development of developing renewables and also constructing the power grids. And Dunhuang use all kind of technology to develop its solar power resources. Dunhuang also engaged in international collaboration to work on the urban renewable energy development and improving as well as increasing the proportion of renewable energy in its energy mix. The second example is Qinghai province. Qinghai already realized 100% renewable energy utilization. So the blue bar refers to a consecutive 7 days when all of the electricity has been provided by hydropower, and the orange power refers to consecutive 9 days where electricity has been supplied by green resources. We can see that Qinghai heavily relies on hydropower, and solar power and wind power takes a relatively smaller share. However, together with hydropower, solar power, and wind power, Qinghai realizes 100% renewable electricity. Qinghai increases the installed capacity of renewable energy, and it's also enhancing its grid connectivity capacity. Qinghai encouraged the mass public to take part in this process and also offering favorable policies. These are photos from Qinghai province, including solar power projects and wind power projects. The third example is the Tianjin Eco-City. It is an industrial park area in Tianjin in North China. This eco-city develops renewable energy as well. However, due to limited land area, this eco-city uses BIPV. It uses the the roof space for solar power and the solar panels. The fourth example is Yancheng City in Jiangsu province. Yancheng develops offshore wind power and has already formed a complete industrial chain for offshore wind power, including the manufacturing of equipment as well as the installation and the grid connectivity. Yancheng is now the #1 city of offshore wind power in China. Yancheng also takes quite a lot of measures. For example, they have very detailed plan for wind power development based on their resource endowment, industry foundation, as well as the development speed in different time areas, time frames. There are also tax incentives as well as tax reductions policy developed by the Yancheng local government. The fifth example is Huoyang County in Jiangxi province. Huoyang is endowed with rich water resources. So Huoyang actually built solar power farms on the surface of water and builds them into an integrated system. So this is the largest solar power farm on the surface of water in Asia. So we can also learn from Poyang County's experience. It uses the water surface, and it also looks into the features and the lifestyle of the fish species in these water areas. Poyang County uses a very advanced and digitalized operation method to operate these solar farms. And then I have a summary for China's renewable energy development experience. So after my previous presentation, I think I can summarize in 6 points, including following the policies and promoting renewable energy utilization. Second, strengthening international cooperation for win-win and all-win results. China's renewable development starts with international collaboration. China works with Germany, Denmark, Japan, Canada, UK, US, as well as many other countries. China has been receiving help and support from all of those above-mentioned countries. And third, China considers people's livelihood and attach great importance to market cultivation. Before year 2000, renewable energy develops in remote areas in China and help people have better access to electricity. So that improves people's livelihood from the beginning. Fourth, China focuses on technical standards and regulating business practices. If without
很难这个保证健康发展。第5个呢，就是注重能力建设，激发企业。
Fifth, China focuses on capacity building and boosting business dynamics. All stakeholders, including the entrepreneurs and the policymakers, need to have better awareness and higher awareness of renewable energy. Six, China is innovating financing models and diversifying financing channels to provide more capitals for developing the renewable energies. So in conclusion, the development of renewable energy in China benefits from the continuous and stable incentive policies, international support and cooperation, personnel training, implementation of standards, R&D technology, capacity building, as well as the consideration of people's livelihood. For my last part of presentation, I will talk about the trends and challenges of renewable energy development in China. What are the future challenges and opportunities for the future? That's a topic we all care about. In the future, renewables will continue to grow in a very high speed, not only in China, but also globally. China has its own carbon peaking and carbon neutrality goals. And in the future, China will have a more collaborated and integrated system, including distributed systems and also centralized systems. They will complement each other in the future. Although China faces many opportunities, there are challenges, obviously. For example, we are still lacking peaking capacity, and we do not have a mature electricity market mechanism. And we do have room for improvement in terms of planning. We also have to work hard to further reduce the cost of renewables. And we have some uncoordinated issues between renewable energy and ecological protection, land usage planning, marine usage and planning, etc. And in the future, when faced with these challenges, we will also take actions to solve those problems. So action 1, including collaboration among different departments. And we have to get more people, more stakeholders get involved. And action number 2 is we will develop distributed PV and distributed wind power. So where the energy is produced, the energy can be consumed. Action 3, we should launch and introduce the renewable energy law as soon as possible. And action 4 and 5, lowering cost and strengthening international collaboration. Well, at last, I will talk about opportunities and potential collaboration between China and Pakistan. First, we can study together and look into policy research, including renewable energy law, renewable energy development planning standards, etc. Second, we can have some capacity building and training projects. And third, we can work together on feasibility study, program construction, as well as its operation and maintenance. And the fourth, provide electricity for people who don't have access to power yet. We can build those wind power and PV power projects, wind power and hydropower complementary projects, etc. And opportunity 5, we can build up a renewable energy manufacture industry in Pakistan, including the manufacturing of solar panels, inverters, wind turbines, biomass solid fuel equipments, and biomass cook stoves, etc. Opportunity 6, we can work together on green investment and green financing to provide more capital for these projects. Thank you so much for listening. For our association, we work with many renewable energy enterprises in China. We are very happy and we look forward to working with Renewable First and other organizations and institutions in Pakistan to foster a closer partnership between China and Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vaichan, for providing this insightful presentation and giving us a chance to analyze China's renewable energy journey and the key takeaways we can get from it is that either getting the more international investors on board and collaborations can make a win-win situation for all of us. So moving forward to our next session, we have Mr. Hyan, who is currently the Secretary General of Wind Energy Association, Vice Chairman of the World Wind Energy Association, and Director of the China General Certification Center. Above all, Mr. Hyan is involved in the formulation and revision of China's renewable energy law, the 13th and the 14th 5 years plans for the development of RE sector. So, Mr. Hyan, can you share your screen with us? Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, it's fine. We can see it.
高兴来介绍一下中国风电发展的一些情况。先谈谈中国风电发展的。
First of all, let's see the status quo of China's wind power development last year in 2022. China's newly installed capacity of wind power is about 400 million kilowatts, and last year there's an increase of about 5 GW. That is to say, last year, China's cumulative installed capacity for wind power has accounted for half of the world. By the end of 2022, wind power penetration has risen to 8.8%. The capacity is large. The consumption proportion is relatively small in Chinese market. To achieve the goal of carbon neutral, we need to further strengthen the effort, and there is a huge room for developing. Last year, China's newly installed capacity of offshore wind power is 5.1 gigawatt. Also last year, the newly installed capacity of global offshore wind power is about 10 gigawatt, and China accounts for about half of it. We have also put effort in developing floating offshore wind power innovation. Last year, there were 3 pilot projects that are put into place. The industrialization of wind power development is huge. The onshore turbines reached 8 to 10 megawatt, and offshore turbines exceeded 18 megawatt. These phenomena greatly lower down the cost of energy generation. Besides, the rotor diameter of the onshore turbines is greater than 190 meters, and for offshore, it's greater than 260 meters. As for the height of wind turbines, the maximum hub height is about 170 meters in 2022, which is really appreciable. Now, Chinese wind turbines have been installed in about 50 countries, and China has some famous projects in Pakistan. The most two famous projects are Dawo Wind Power Project and the Sahel project. The past couple of years have witnessed the great achievements of China's wind power development. The onshore capacity has risen from 600 kilowatts to the huge number now. And also along with this is reduce of cost. Now subsidy is now needed, and now we have entered into the parity stage. For example, in some natural resource intensive regions, the cost has been brought down. And for example, for offshore, the cost has been brought to 3 to 5 mao in Chinese currency. Here are some lessons we can draw from the past lessons. Why can we bring the price down to the current stage? Here are some reasons. The first reason is the renewable energy law. It helps to provide subsidies and parity policies. Now, China has become the world's largest market. In the past, the newly installed capacity of China every year accounted for half of the globe. Such a great market creates huge potential for China's development in RE. Without the driving force of the market, we cannot reach the current stage of wind power parity. So I believe the regulations and laws are the most important, and I believe the Chinese government contributed a lot to go to this stage. For example, we created a very integrated value chain from manufacturing to the operations and maintenance. The whole industrial line is mature. To achieve the goal, the Chinese government made a lot of contributions. According to our statistics, by the end of last year, China has cost 1 trillion Chinese yuan in the subsidy for wind power development, and this subsidy will continue to be lasting 2035, and the total value will reach about 4 trillion yuan. So it is a large investment that shows the great efforts made by China. These achievements cannot be done without the subsidies, and the development can be very slow without these incentives and subsidies. We know that the cost would be high without policy support, let alone the scaling and advancement of technology. And without these laws and regulations, there will be a great lock. But now we reached a great scale with this 4 trillion yuan encouragement. And we estimate that in the future, the cost will be further lowered down. And we believe in countries like Pakistan, the cost can be lower also to 0.3 and even to 0.2 yuan in some regions. We estimate that to 2025, wind power will be the most economical and sustainable energy type, and this will contribute a lot to the world's carbon neutral effort. It's unimaginable without such subsidies. Now we know that there is a great need for energy transition, and we know that wind power and PV are the most feasible methods. And in this regards, China really made contributions for the international community. There are also challenges we are confronted with, including the land exploitation and the grid building with the growth of demand, we also need some systematic reform for the grids to achieve the carbon neutral targets, to lower the 140 million tons of carbon dioxide to zero. We need to do more. That is also a task for the 14th five-year plan of China. That is to say, from 2020 to 2025, we will have more movements. Next step, we will make some efforts in some population dense areas in China, and in the rural areas of these provinces, we will build wind farms for the development of RE. And we forecast that in the coming years, each year, the newly capacity will be 8 to 10 gigawatts. In some areas, the cost would be as low as 0.1 yuan. Besides, there are a lot of industrial integration and innovation development, with the costs continuing to be reduced. By the year of 2050, China's PV capacity and wind power capacity will reach 3 billion. So we need to combine with the technologies with other industries such as hydrogen synthesis, methane manufacturing, and so on. That is to answer the demands of energy storage, as well as transforming the energy to support other industries such as aerospace and so on. I think there are a lot of opportunities with Pakistan, and I may have some suggestions. Over the past 2 decades or 3 decades, China gave 3.7 trillion yuan to bring the cost of PV and wind power to an affordable price, and sometimes the cost is even lower than some other ordinary energy types. So I believe Pakistan should make use of the natural resources like the wind and sunshine. I know that Pakistan is endowed with wind and sunshine, and in some regions there is a shortage of electricity. I believe Pakistan can skip the so-called fire code energy development and directly goes into the wind power based development. So there are some efforts to make. First, you need to assess and evaluate the resource of your natural resources, especially for PV and wind power. What is capacity? What is the reserve? And what is the curve of the capacity development? And by these data, we can draw a blueprint for future development. So in summary, the first step is to make detailed surveys and collect data. The second step is to step up the investment in the relevant industry, especially in the price policies. You need to formulate more policies for wind power G. The marginal cost is 0 and there is no resource consumed. So you need to continue the long-term PPAs and so on. With these efforts, you will reduce the uncertainties in investment and attract more investors.
Hello, everybody. I think there seems to be a delay from Mr. Hayan's side. Give us 2 minutes to solve this. Thank you.
Mr. Hayan, can you hear us? So, Mr. Hayan is having some technical difficulties, and we are moving forward to our next speaker, Mr. Stefan. Welcome, Mr. Stefan. Going through his introduction, he has more than 20 years of experience in renewable energy, managing the World Wind Energy Association since its foundation and initiating a range of global renewable energy activities, including the Global 100% Renewable Energy Platform, Community Energy Working Group at the IRENA Coalition for Action. And he has also worked closely with China, supporting the wind industry growth from its early stages. Sir, can you provide some insight on the technical aspects of current infrastructural and policy requirements to accelerate RE deployment in Pakistan in terms of transmission, grid stability, reliability, and affordability? Mr. Srifat.
Yes, thank you very much. A very good afternoon to everybody. It's my great pleasure to be invited to speak at this important meeting. Actually, as we discussed before, I have not now presented slides, but rather I'm ready to provide my input and my comments on the discussion that takes place. Unfortunately, Chin Hayan is now not obviously connected with us, because I'd be very pleased to also to have some interaction with him. It has been very interesting, of course, and impressive to listen to the two previous speakers and listen to what China has achieved in the past years. Let me underline that the work of our association, and we are a global umbrella organization with members in more than 100 countries, and the head office is in Bonn at the UN campus. We've been working, I've personally been working a lot, in particular with China and Pakistan. So this meeting here kind of touches the core of what we've been doing. One of my first major visits to Asia after we created this association led me via Pakistan to China. It was in early 2004 when the Alternative Energy Development Board was founded, and we together with the founding president of our association, Dr. Prevan Megard, We attended a conference, spoke there in Islamabad, and then traveled from there to Beijing and met there to prepare our first World Wind Energy Conference, which was taking place in China in that year, in autumn of that year. So I could very well compare the situation, and I can still compare the situation at that time. In early 2004, there was hardly any concrete wind installations, any practical activities in Pakistan. Of course, you know that, of course, very well. Some smaller wind turbines, I think, were installed, but nothing sizable. And the situation in China was not that different. I think it was around 500 megawatt of installed capacity in China. And that same year, with the conference that we did in the country, changed a lot. And at the same time, of course, that was also when Pakistan started to develop in renewable energy policies. We did in that year 2004 our World Wind Energy Conference, as I mentioned, in China. And I think indeed there is a lot that we can learn from the experience that we see happened in China, because at that time, China and Asia in general, aside from India, which was always at that time already they had some kind of wind industry and some manufacturers. But most of the industrial activities 20 years ago were taking place, in particular in Europe and also in North America, in the United States. So what China did at that time, and it was kind of a catalyst for that, was our event in Beijing in autumn 2004, was bring people from outside China together with the Chinese experts. Of course, there were people like our later president, Professor He Xin, who is also the honorary chairman of the Chinese Wind Energy Association, who was involved many years before in research and development of wind energy. But that year was really an important year, because that's when many Chinese companies started joint ventures, concrete collaboration with international manufacturers, with other companies from around the world. And I think it was like half year later, the first renewable energy law was adopted and put in place. So what we could easily see is that, it was a starting point on the one side, concrete collaboration between Chinese companies and international companies. And on the other side, the policies which kind of laid the basis for the development. China, of course, has a very big market, so there was a lot of space to develop an industry. And I was told that in between there was at some time close to 100 or something like 100 wind turbine manufacturers, which were kind of competing for who has the best technology. And also the models of collaboration were quite different. Some Chinese companies developed their own technologies completely separately on their own. Others had license agreements with international manufacturers, others like joint ventures. So there was really a big playground. I think that was very important, together with a clear and Xin Haiyan just mentioned, reduce uncertainties. That was certainly important, that there was a clear and stable framework that allowed this, on the one hand, the industrial side to grow, and those who invested in wind farms, who bought then eventually, of course, the wind turbines, they knew that they would get a remuneration, and they would, their investment is secured. I think there's been very clear signals from the Chinese government. And so in those 20 years since that start, and if I may just say that on the industrial side, that was really kind of the start, there was a very kind of strong development, and China managed to now host and the complete supply chain. So certainly China is also now technologically a leader. We heard these from the numbers, but it's not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of technology. Some of the manufacturers are now world leading. Goldwind is always competing also for the number one place in terms of the sold wind turbine capacity per year. So that reflects us also when you look at who is offering now the largest wind turbines. that strategy obviously has really resulted in a very strong industrial basis with a complete supply chain. I think when I look at it internationally, of course, there were some point, and China became number one, the most important market, the biggest market by far. And the Chinese companies became more and more kind of independent from also other investors. And that is really very important. I remember, I believe that when we started, the target for 2020 was 30 gigawatt of installed capacity, but that was that was reached 10 years earlier. So with such a clear strategy and support, China could be much faster than all those projections that we saw. There was certainly always a very strong focus on the on the domestic market. That I believe is very, very clear. Really focus on develop our own industry together with the complete supply chain that we need in parallel. Also, what you also mentioned, I should talk about, of course, the grid infrastructure, for example. I mean, you cannot build wind turbines when there is no grid. You can connect that to it. So some of the important companies like State Grid, which is, as far as I know, one of the largest companies at all in the world, in terms of like manpower they are employing, the national grid operator of China has been very closely involved in this and kind of also supporting this. And I remember having visited China and one of the centers, R&D centers, and that always been a very clear focus, not trying to block or kind of find excuses why it doesn't work, but really working on the solutions. Although even there, of course, there's sometimes opposing views, but that's always been kind of solved in a very, I would say, fruitful way, as you can see from the development. When we look again at Pakistan, at that time, the first policies were announced as well. I speak about the year 2004. And then, obviously, the development did not take place as fast as many of us would want it to see it. Actually, I visited both countries in those last 20 years, I think more than other countries. And that's why I really could compare that. I've visited also many factories in China. Of course, this all stopped at the COVID now. So the last years, I have not been to China, but same with Pakistan. I think my last visit was 2019 to Islamabad. What we can see certainly is that there's been delays and I think also some uncertainties on the side of when I look at the Pakistani market. We've been trying to support, identify what are those barriers. And I think that many of these barriers have obviously been overcome, because then there's been investment. And I just was told by our colleague Zishan about the investment last year and the installation numbers, which are internationally not that bad. Of course, far away from the dimension that we can still see in China. Although the Chinese market, according to what I've seen, also slowed a little bit down. So unfortunately, it seems that the whole world, in spite of the energy crisis that we see globally, has slowed down the development in general. But, and I think this is also now what we see now globally, everybody now understands that renewables, in particular wind power, need to be used in a much, much larger scale. So there's no more time now to lose. We all, and I know that you in Pakistan, you're hit even much more than we in Europe, which can pay more for LNG now, for example. In Germany, we never used LNG. Now we use it, and I know that this is now on cost of, for example, countries like Pakistan, where some of the deliveries are not arriving. I know that this all tells us that now it's really the time to accelerate the development of wind power in particular. Of course, the same applies to solar energy. And really now let's look at what China has been doing. I think listening very carefully to what Zhen Haiyan has just presented is certainly tells us a lot. Really clear priority now on a reliable framework. And I think indeed, I totally agree that reduce uncertainties, that is really important. And I would also say that now China has done that already. scale up the market and scale up ambitions very clearly. I mean, Pakistan has huge wind resources, we know that. And when you look at the country size and population, compare China and Pakistan, of course, China is bigger, but in terms of population, in terms of land area as well. But otherwise, the kind of share that is can possibly be covered from wind, but also solar, are of course similar. So it's really now time to scale up, and that certainly requires also looking at the grid infrastructure. I've mentioned that at a previous meeting, which certainly does not only mean the transmission lines, but also the distribution network, which is, I know, often neglected. We don't look at that. We just look at from the old system kind of perspective. We only look at the, believing that we have a big power station, then we must bring this power to the load centers. But it's been mentioned already also in the case of China, that China is also looking much more in the distributed generation from that angle. But I would say, yes, indeed, what we need to learn is have clear ambition, and on the policy side, clear preferences. That is certainly what China has been doing. There's, and our previous speakers, both of them, have of course raised many aspects. That includes, of course, skills development. We need to have the people who are trained and knowledgeable about this. And I would certainly like to encourage Pakistan now to create also more industrial capacities for that. And certainly China is a very good partner for this, because there is now the whole complete supply chain available in the country. So without doubt, I mean, this is something China has done a lot by itself, but also learned from others a lot, built a lot together with partners. And that's certainly now, I would say, the time when we look at Pakistan as a big country and one of the biggest countries. Actually, it has a potential, and potentially the market size is big enough also now to look at really strengthening the industrial side, manufacturing of equipment, of course, without neglecting at the same time, this is the precondition, that there must be a market, and the market now obviously largely depends on the infrastructure that we see. So this is kind of the comment also from my global perspective. Of course, there are also other countries and other potential partners, but I know that there is a special collaboration between China and Pakistan, and the Chinese the China-Pakistan corridor for clean energy, I think, is a very good framework to build on what has already been achieved. I also know that China is one of the big investors already in wind turbines, so make use of it, and please raise ambitions in Pakistan. That we don't have a choice. It's not only for climate reasons, of course, climate, and I understand what your country suffered more than most other countries from climate change directly, but also we must secure the energy supply. And that is the lesson now probably of the last year, as far as possible, avoid importing in particular fossil fuels. Yeah, I'm happy to now receive questions or discuss how to continue, and thank you for inviting.
Like, one thing is that, as in China's case, a renewable energy law created a lot of impact, especially in its expansions and the subsidies it provided. So how would it impact Pakistan if it's replicated in the similar pattern by the government? So how would you see this coming forward in terms of law and regulations?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, well, now you are in the fortunate situation that there is no need to pay more for wind power than for conventional, for coal or whatever. I mean, nuclear, not to talk about, because there's this price reduction that we have seen. We see this, and this is the ironic situation in which we are. For example, in Europe, renewables actually are the lowest cost options, but still, because of the way the electricity market works, we pay much higher prices now because the electricity market is not reflecting this. So a policy must really make use of the low cost that we have in wind power in particular. And again, I think the key is to reduce uncertainties. If you have less uncertainties for investors, and obviously also investors require less money because they don't need to cover these uncertainties. I know that this discussion, I have commented on that a couple of times, with a really very well working kind of feed-in tariff system, which has been replaced by something that is obviously created some more uncertainty. So that needs to be carefully considered whether that is now the right way, or whether that part of the also more recent investment history in Pakistan is not something that should be referred to. But yeah, of course, very clearly learn from the lessons, bad lessons now in Europe, that the prices are going up, although wind power price has gone down and has the potential of reducing this, but this money is somewhere reaching some people in between, not the consumers, whether it's industrial consumers who are quite desperate at the moment as well, or people like you and me.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Stefan, for your insights, and how could we collaborate with China in terms of manufacturing and the industry recognitions. So moving forward to our next speaker, we have Dr. Hassan Daudbad. He's an associate professor at Bahia University, and he has worked very closely with the Chinese state-owned and private entities, and focusing on the CPEC projects, blue economy, and new initiatives. He is also the senior advisor at SDPI. So, considering China's innovative regulatory policy framework, specifically, it would be valuable if you could discuss specific instruments deployed in China that could make sense to replicate in Pakistan for greater integration of renewables.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending
Good
on from where
afternoon.
you are. It's a great day here, and my apologies, I'm traveling, so perhaps the background might not be as formal as it is. This is very interesting topic, and I think it is happening at a very right time, where Pakistan is in a transition, and while we remain politically active on certain other issues, I think on the energy aspect, we have made some very good way forward, and I think we have done great justice to the way that we should work. But coming back to your question, I think in the recent times, and I in my speech now, I will be shifting my hat from a scholar standpoint to a practitioner standpoint, because when I was heading the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, there were few challenges, and I'll highlight those. And I totally agree to the speaker, Stefan, who spoke earlier about creating that enabling environment and pull factor for attracting more investment in the renewable sector. But there are certain headwinds, and I'll speak about them a little later. But let me just focus on China's method and China's ways of doing work in the renewable energy, and also in energy conservation, and also environment protection. So in the recent time, we as scholars, especially those working in international relations, perhaps and other fields, have begun to conceive of security more broadly towards global environment change through the lens of human security, connecting such problems like melting glaciers and carbon emissions to poverty, vulnerability, equity, and conflict. And perhaps as global leader, China has pledged to peak emissions before 2030 and become carbon neutral before 2050. And these are important commitments to help mitigate the worst effect of climate change. And if you're following Chinese political development in the last say perhaps 1 week, and if you're following the NPC's meeting, the two sessions, I think lots were discussed around the renewable as such, not as such, but on the environment. And if you study the new China Global Initiative, it clearly highlights and underlines the importance of environment, and also the new initiative that China has given just recently on the global security initiative. They are linking environment with security. And I think countries like Pakistan, which have actually seen the catastrophe because of the climate change, we need to learn more from China and perhaps also leverage our partnership in the Belt and Road Initiative for getting the kind of support that we must get and also we must look at. You can stop me when my time is over because this topic is very dear to me. So I'll keep speaking on ways and means. I will also highlight some of the challenges I had as the head of the board of investment and how creating the environment and capacity within the public sector and private sector. Because when you talk of good ideas also, they also entail certain risk. And how do we mitigate those risks? We need to learn from China as we gathered today here and need to review China's challenges and recent accomplishments in addressing environment problems from domestic pollution to global climate change. And I will also compare China's commitment to clean energy technology with that of other leading nations and discuss key achievements in green pathways, including forging new partnerships towards green transitioning. You know, all this started, and I have been following China's development. I've worked with China. My niche is projects with China. And I vividly remember in 2010, the NPC, the National People's Congress, laid out plans for ambitious and energy conservation, measures new energy technologies. They spoke about energy, environment protection initiatives funded by a massive outlay of 20 billion US dollar at that time. And year on year, this has improved. Year on year, their capacity and understanding and China's capacity and understanding of being the global leader in terms of research and development in the sector, and also in terms of bringing out new technologies and helping countries to develop partnership has increased. And this is very vital for us to understand. Today, China has set some of the world's most ambitious renewable power plants and targets also, including over 20 gigawatt for solar photovoltaics, 30 gigawatts from biomass, and a massive 150 gigawatt from wind projects. And this is easier said than done. These targets amount to over 15% of their country's electricity supply. And I think more, I'm being conservative here, but I think it's around 20%. And when you talk of China's energy requirement, these are massive, huge. And of course, one of the China's main goal is in the development of renewable energy projects and also technology that has been to supply off-grid electricity to more than 2 million rural households. Because even in China, they have these challenges of remote areas where, grid providing electricity through grid is still a challenge. So China wants to clean up their environment without foregoing growth, with the added benefit of establishing China as a global comparative innovator. And this is helping countries like Pakistan. We are not just their neighbors, we are their partners in Belt and Road Initiative. And likewise, China's low carbon, high efficiency energy is vital for Pakistan. We need to thoroughly advance the energy revolution and speed up the planning and development of a system for new energy sources. And we have had these challenges, just in 2013, Pakistan remained very responsible when we were doing CPEC. We started with renewable projects in Thar. And these projects are not just meant for providing energy to our grid. They are also responsible for creating the socio-economic benefit, socio-economic linkages. So when we were setting up these plants in remote areas of Sindh, these wind power plants and hybrid plants, though the start was modest, we started with 300 megawatt only, but still the transition was huge. And today our new energy policy speaks about energy basket where our domestic and indigenous sources of energies, including renewable, will be used. And perhaps what we need to see is, and this is based on my experience as someone who's dealt with public-private partnership, we need to reduce some of the risk perceived by the private sector also. and in terms of their participation in our projects, because China has done that. Their state-owned enterprises, their private enterprises have actually stepped forward and helped the government setting up and realizing the targets those were set for. So going forward, like China, we need to work on comprehensive regulatory and institutional framework for renewable energy policy, and that will require addressing major hurdles. And I hope you understand the overall quantum and the challenge that we have. And if these floods do not wake us up, what will? And also, there are certain remote areas in Pakistan which are where the excess of electricity is still a challenge. And though we speak about high growth number, provision of electricity is a basic need now. And therefore, this will require us to addressing major hurdles and risk associated, as the lack of an independent monitoring mechanism and the need for greater transparency is imperative. And meanwhile, China can continue to help our capacity, to help develop our capacity to manage projects in renewable energy, including those requiring us to get training on for grid. I mean, as low as for the grid operators to manage the intermittency of the renewable power supply, which often requires the modernization of grid technology to make the electric distribution system more, practical and perhaps manageable. We have had these challenges, and even as we speak, these challenges are there. But I think the overall quest for cleaner, greener energy is growing. Overall quest for finding cheaper energy for our industry is growing. We have we have done a lot of exercise. I have been participating in this exercise on wheeling, and in the last 5 years, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where I was heading the investment board, we were able to work on wheeling and providing cheaper energy through hydro projects to our industrial zones. And similar work when we were in Dubai Expo, we were able to sign MOUs for around solarization of our special economic zone, and our special economic zone development company is working on that. And the good part is that the global donor agencies are also keen to support us. Not just China, the other large global agencies are willing to help us because they want us to take this step forward. But I'll end, since we're speaking about China, I'll end on Deng Xiaoping's method of development. And he speaks that we will cross the river by touching each pebble. We should not be three. A, we should not do things in haste. B, we should look at a very good regulatory mechanism which creates the ease of doing business also. Because unless we create that ease of doing business, we will not be able to create that pull factor. And while investors come, we should do their hand holding also. They come in an alien environment. Pakistan has its own methods, ways of doing things, and creating the work processes. For them to get NOCs and all the other required regulatory documents are essential. So the role of Board of Investment, the role of a Alternate Energy Development Board, the role of power divisions and all the regulators is important. We also need to actually encourage our friends and partners in the private sector, not just home, but abroad also. Encourage them to come in Pakistan, witness the market. We are a huge country, over 1.2 billion people with great requirements of consumer products. And wherever their consumption is more, the energy consumption grows also. So as I said, I can keep going and going. This is very favorite topic of mine. So I'll stop here and invite any questions if you have.
Dr. Hassan, would you like to comment on the 5-year plans that China implemented to increase more renewable energy share in its energy mix? So how could we replicate such kind of thing for the Pakistani infrastructure?
You are a youngster.
好的，我想因为您呢可能是年轻人啊，所以我觉得要当心自己许的愿望，因为它可能真的会变成
around renewable energy and also using indigenous sources. And although I keep supporting and highlighting the importance of renewable energy, we are also looking at projects of coal from Thar, because we have had this natural endowment of coal here. So now looking at China's 5 years plan and comparing them with Pakistan, I think what we do is, what the difference between us and China is, and let me be a little harsh here also, is the method of implementation. China sets up goals and ensure that, and each year when they have this NPC and when they have these sessions, they look at how the policies that they crafted in the earlier session, how were they implemented. And this implementation not just starts, and this is one important aspect we must learn. It does not start. Our method, and I keep saying this model is a flawed model. You know, energy conservation, resources conservation, it has a mean. And that mean start from, and let me just use Chinese philosophy also, starts from home, then goes to the government, and then goes to the private sector. What we do is that we reinvent the wheel. We do not understand the importance of society in the overall transition, because unless the society realizes the importance of renewable energy, unless they are willing to take step forward and actually bring in like off-grid solutions. We worked in Balochistan. China provided us about 500 off-grid domestic household solar systems, and we were able to distribute them. But then the maintenance, they won't come and do the maintenance here. So what we need is while we set up, and we have set up good policies in and around that, we have been able to attract investment around 30 billion in 5 years, starting from 2015, because from 13 to 15, we were in CPEC working on understanding the model and MOUs and ideas and concepts. So from there on, we have learned. The other thing, so from understanding the method of transition, starting from home and society, going to government, and then going to the private sector is A. Second is the setting up of flexible yet realistic policies that can actually help achieve the targets that you set, whether it's in energy, whether it's another sector, whether in social sector also. So this is second. Third is the role of the regulators. You know, regulators have to provide one window. Unless you provide one window to the, and regulators means the board of investments and other bodies which are associated with the investment. Unless they do not provide one window to the investors will come, perhaps stay a few days, enjoy the luxury and hospitality of their partners here, and then go back. So that policies of NOCs, and if you would look at the number of NOCs that are required for setting up a plant, you would be surprised. And but we do not want our investors to come and then go back. You know, we want them to come. There's a whole exercise done to call that investor. So I think, and China, look at China, look at their policy they've just announced day before yesterday on attracting investment in energy. And despite all what is happening politically in and around China, you know. So I think we should be realistic, and all our leadership, from bureaucracy to technocrats to the government and perhaps the political leadership, they have to be pragmatic to understand the requirement of having renewable energy. This is not a good to have thing. It is a must to have thing. And this is a mindset that we need to have when we make this transition and policies.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Now I'll be concluding this webinar that what could ideally be learned from China's journey is that its strong policy making and understanding between regulatory authorities, government and non-government organizations, and the private infrastructure. The Pakistan has a lot of potential of renewable energy resources, and that can replicate it to attain the maximum renewable energy potential in our context. So we will be having next session of this webinar, which is probably beyond 11th April, and it would be titled as Accelerating Chinese Investment in Pakistan's Renewable Energy Market. That would be highlighting how Chinese investors can invest in Pakistan and how the business could be done easily, so that there are proper regulatory bodies in which that investments could be secured, and there is the lesser uncertainties that could be highlighted. So, moving forward to the question answer sessions, I'll be taking questions from all the participants. You can write your questions in the chat window, and I'll be taking it for the panelists. Mr. Wajid would not be here, so there will be the three panelists, Mr. Srifan, Dr. Hassan, and Mr. Hayan. So there is one question from it's from Nida Hassan from Metro Power Group, and she's asking Dr. Hassan regarding the employability and challenges. What does he think regarding the challenges the human resource development can face in order to hire and retain people in RE sector? So it's more in terms of the uncertainty we have seen in renewable energy sector since the last year. So Dr. Hassan, what would be your comment on that? So we can't hear you.
Oh,
Uh,
sorry. Let me just say, it's a very good question. And I think when I said building our capacity, let me first highlight the challenges and I'll give you a roadmap on that. So the challenges are perhaps our vocational centers. We do not have enough vocational centers, and we focus more on higher education, and perhaps the step towards vocational training is still lagging. So we need to have vocational centers which can actually provide us the human resource for taking the kind of the leap forward. As we speak, we are lacking behind that. We in our the curriculum of our TVET institutions are still old age. They do not understand. I mean, I'm not referring to the technology of the future like AI and robotics. I'm just talking about mechanical and electrical understanding of this simpler, very basic renewable household energy projects. So we are lacking numbers of qualified technicians. We are lacking numbers of managers who can understand the management and the financial aspect of renewable energy, because that's also a challenge. And that also goes, and also the capacity of ours to undertake public-private projects in energy sector. We sometimes we are over risk averse in terms of doing certain projects, especially in the public sector. So three things we need to do. A is to build our complete institutions around that. And using this platform, I will encourage investors to come and set up perhaps training institutions here, and we can find joint venture partners for them for setting up, because the thirst for development, because it's not just for Pakistan. If they develop good human resources, they can go out and find employability outside Pakistan, because renewable energy and the projects around that is a must now, and sustainable projects. I always whenever I speak at educational forums and also technical forums, I always say that the sustainability and green sustainable projects are the way forward, and therefore we need to produce human resource to undertake that. B, in terms of investment and institutions, I have highlighted. B is our capacity to understand the requirement of ease of doing business. And this is not just some philosophical thing that we need to do, or a practical aspect of it. It's just a mindset. If you start with mindset that you have to create ease for the investor, whether they are from home or abroad, you will be able to attract more investment coming to Pakistan. It's just simple. Investment even goes to war zones, my dear. So therefore, setting up the right kind of mindset, and it would start. And the government doesn't have to play a role on this. It's a basic thing. And when we teach entrepreneurial skills, I think this is one skill we need to teach in our academic institutions. The third is to doing realistic feasibility, capacity to do realistic and feasibilities and creating the business cases. That capacity is lacking in private sector. Big investment houses have that, but I think we can even stretch this down to basic investment portfolios. So in that case, I think the capacity is less to do feasibilities, and when their capacity is less, they start thinking at it as a risk. And my professor, I remember my professor, and I remember vividly telling me that having more risk is not an issue. Not having a risk mitigation plan is an issue. So I think we need to develop better risk mitigation plans and make this. It's not as difficult as perhaps some of us assume, and especially in the public sector.
Dr. Hassan, I have another question for you from Tanveer Mirza, and he's asking your inputs on current on-ground scenario of excessive curtailments of wind IPPs, how this will impact the overall confidence of investors, especially the foreign ones.
Well, I think there are a few assumptions that we make. I do not think there is a curtailment per se from the government side. I think the reason for which we assume that there's a curtailment is some of the factors that I've highlighted earlier, including their capacity to do so many projects. And also our wind corridor is not as big as we somehow assume, at least based on the feasibilities that are existing. Maybe we have more and then we realize more. Especially there's a belt around Sindh that we have some in northern area, but then this wind corridor is not as much as that we realize. Or at least our feasibilities are not existing, which gives us new dimension. The other aspect is that the private investor in our country, because we are a developing country, and developing country means that the resources are scarce. So in developing country, the private sector only likes good cases to work on. They like success stories, not failures. And sometimes when you go with novel ideas, there will be some challenges and there will be some, I would say, the outcome might not be as rewarding as perhaps some of us think. So I think the private sector also have to have a big heart. We should also work closely with the government to encourage them to do these projects. But for me, I do not think that there is a policy to not to have more renewable projects, including the wind projects. There's a huge requirement. We have requirement along our coastal belt where we should work on, and I think the government realizes that. And sometimes if you feel that the government is not taking the right step, we can create the right kind of noise to make sure that they do the projects that we need. And seminars like this, and perhaps people like us keep speaking at forums that creates the kind of synergy. थोड़ा सा हमें synergize करने की जरूरत है. We need to synergize all of us, the government, the private sector, the academia, the think tank, the technocrats, and people, the consumers also. If you tell the consumer that this is a cheaper source of energy and this can look after your energy needs for a sizable number of years, then perhaps the consumer will create demand. Business works around consumers. The consumer demand creates business, and business creates the push for the government to do policy making. Government's job is not to do projects. Government job is to create the kind of policy method for us to do those projects. I hope I've answered that.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for your answer. Moving forward to our next question for Mr. Hayan. as you said, the renewable energy law.
Can I request to leave because I'm traveling also, and I have to move towards Lahore. So
Yeah,
my apologies for
sure.
not taking more questions. You can send me on WhatsApp and I'll respond. But the only issue is that the connection might be intermittent.
Yeah, sure. We will send you the questions later and we'll disseminate the answers later on. So
Thank you.
have a good afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye.
So for Mr. Han, I have this question from one of the attendee, and they said that the renewable energy law set a solid foundation for development of renewable energy. From that point of view, Chinese RE industry, where do you think Pakistan is lagging in terms of laws, policies, and regulations? Mr. Hayan? Um,
I think according to the renewable energy law, I think the key is to determining the goal of Pakistan in developing renewable energy. After setting the target, we will boost the confidence of investors. This is important. Secondly, apart from the primary goal, which draws a blueprint for the investment space, so with this, investors can have confidence. So secondly, what is a guarantee? You know that the marginal cost for RE is 0. So if you can give a long-term PPA to investors, they will be insured. And so this is important to eliminate the uncertainties in investment. This is very important. And it has been set out in the renewable energy law, and we know that the cost of wind power is even cheaper than coal-fired energies, and so wind power can be a contribution instead of a burden. Third, we need to make effort in grid building. For example, we should make stipulations, make regulations about grid construction. So construction should be an infrastructure, and this should be set in your laws. So for example, with the development of grid construction, the enterprises should have the capability of transmitting the power to consumers, and also there should be other aspects regarding such as training and technology, innovation, and so on. These should be also written in the laws. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Hayan, for your answer.
How?
So there's one more, that how can we attract more investors around the globe for wind energy, especially in Pakistan, as it's in very rural areas and there isn't much transmission lines over there, so it will be decentralized production. In that scenario, how could we attract the investors over there to develop their own grid stations as well? Mr. Hayan? We can't hear you.
法律内容里面，
Okay, in our law, such as long-term PPA, such as the construction of grid, these some laws are mandatory. These are to boost the confidence of investors and reduce the uncertainties in investment. Once you have eliminated the uncertainties and ensure the investors that they will have good harvest, they will have good results, and then they will come. We know that renewable energy is now not expensive anymore, and it is mature. There is no risk in terms of technology. So the primary concern for investors is about laws and regulations. Can your laws and regulations ensure the investors? That is what they are really concerned about. If you make guarantees for them, they will be willing to come to Pakistan to invest. And according to my understanding, many investors from China have shown their interest in building wind farms in Pakistan. So I think if you have overarching goals and set good frameworks for protection, and then investors will come to your country and make contributions.
Okay.
Okay, that's my answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Hayan. So are we taking more questions, Anam? I can't hear you. As they are mainly for Dr. Hassan and he has left. So
We can ask Mr. Stefan also to answer some of the questions around the feasibility for investors in Pakistan. How would it, so Mr. Farooq has asked, how can overseas investors invest in Pakistan?
Let me underline it first that I think it's really important that the Pakistani government is focusing at first on the domestic investors. I know that you have developed on that side the capacity, I mean, companies who have the know-how, how to develop, how to invest in wind farms. And that obviously should be the kind of the first priority because, yeah, it's then domestically owned. That also applies to when there was this question about electrification of rural areas. There's a lot of international experience, of course. I mean, we're working with people in companies in Africa who are doing it there. That, of course, it's in the conventional structures, let me say, of financing. Those usually typically smaller projects are not yet so much at the forefront, but that, of course, and the government must be aware of it, creating kind of new ways how to look at certain assets and how to look at warranties or guarantees to get investment back. And when looking at it from the right angle and discussing with potential international donors like the World Bank, making clear that those communities, when they have electricity, will generate more income and they will be able to pay back. And that's the experience that we have from many parts of the world, that can help to bridge this kind of equity gap that we see. And this is not a specific situation in Pakistan. Otherwise, the general answer to how to attract international investors is the same like for domestic investors. And that's the same answer that Chin Hayan was giving. Reduce uncertainties. And I think that is even more important for international investors than for local investors, because local investors understand the country and the conditions, of course, much better than someone coming from Dubai or New York or wherever. So rules easy to understand, predictable is certainly even more important. And then, of course, allowing to transfer also profits. That is, of course, natural if you want to have investors, but this touching more like general investment rules that you have in a country. But again, they're giving first priority to local investors and allowing them maybe to work with international investors. That certainly should be kind of on the priority, the first step, and then in partnership attracting. And when you have joint ventures that exists, and that was an important part of the Chinese development, that also then bridges this kind of knowledge gap that international investors usually have. And they have partners because you have stronger companies because they have a strong position on the market, and it would be easier for them, it's not necessarily the government, to work with international partners, be it from China or from other countries.
Thank you so much for your answer. I would like Afaf to Okay, the closing remarks now. And I would request all of you to please follow our esteemed panelists on their social media platforms. And remember first also that if you have any future queries, you can ask for them directly.
As we learned from this whole webinar that China had a long journey.
Can I just say a few things based on domestic experience on the subject?
Sure, sir.
You know, going to remote area, if it makes money and if it makes sense, we can go to any zone. We can even go to jungles to make money. So that's absolutely not an issue. What is an issue is, and I agree to both the speakers earlier, is in terms of government, is the continuity of policy. Too many random changes for the sake of change is the biggest fear factor for an investor. Secondly, is that when you make policies, they should be flexible enough and should cater for the global best practices. While you look at local environment, indigenous environment, and also indigenous capacity. So this is also one factor that you need to look at. In terms of taking the investor to remote area, I think the other challenges and that's a critical challenge is a security. And I think the
那么我们其实现在要去拥抱一些新的技术，我们要立
projects, we've introduced a lot of technology to ensure security. We raised tailor-made security mechanism and systems which worked for us in huge remote areas, especially for hydel projects and for renewable projects. Also, and other projects that we are doing, including optical fiber coming in all the way from the north. So I think that's not a challenge in this time and age. What is it? Your acceptability and capacity to embrace technology and ideas.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So moving forward to the closing remarks, that we have learned a lot today from China's renewable energy transition, that effective policy making can take you further than you have actually targeted for. So for ease of doing business, Dr. Hassan has highlighted a really great scenarios in which Pakistani market could be explored more. And Mr. Stefan's view on the wind energy development, and in the context of both the countries, it has given a comprehensive view that how could we collaborate with each other to attain a development that is required to achieve our net zero targets as well. And Mr. Hayan's presentation highlighted mainly on the manufacturing side and how the wind energy could be utilized for the longer term IPPs that could have more revenues, and also the electrification of the rural areas. So for all these remarks, I would like to sign off from this webinar. I would like to thank all of our panelists over here who have given us their time, and all the attendees here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.